Before you read another word, imagine this. You lean in close to greet someone you admire, a person of wealth, of status, someone at the very top of society 500 years ago. And the first thing that hits you, before you see their fine clothing, before you notice their jewelry, is the smell. A wall of it. Sweat soaked into wool that has never once been washed. Skin that hasn't touched water in months, maybe longer. And here is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. That person doesn't think anything is wrong. In fact, they believe they are doing everything right. They believe that washing, real washing, with water, could kill them. Let that sink in. For a significant stretch of European history, some of the most educated people alive were convinced that bathing was one of the most dangerous things a human being could do. I'm Adrian Vale, and I've spent years digging through the strange, forgotten corners of how people actually lived. Not kings on thrones or battles on maps, but the ordinary, intimate reality of the human body and how we cared for it. And I'll be honest with you, of all the topics I've explored, few have surprised me as much as this one. Because we tend to assume that cleanliness is simple, that people have always wanted to be clean and simply lacked the tools. But the truth is far stranger. For centuries, the very idea of what it meant to be clean was turned completely upside down. To understand how we got there, we have to go back further, to a time when things were very different. Because here's something most people don't realize. The medieval world was not lots of them. In some cities, they numbered in the dozens. People went to soak, to steam, to scrub away the week. The bathhouse was warm, social, alive with conversation and steam and the smell of wet wood. For a small fee, ordinary people, not just the rich, could lower themselves into hot water and simply enjoy it. These places were woven into daily life. In parts of Germany, bathing was so routine that towns had bath days. Workers were sometimes even paid partly in bath money, a small allowance to visit the baths. Records from medieval Paris list dozens of establishments. The bathhouse was where you celebrated, where business was done, where couples sometimes bathed together in wooden tubs, sharing a meal on a board laid across the water. It sounds almost impossibly civilized, and it makes what came next all the more shocking. Because that world, that warm, steaming, water-loving world, was about to be destroyed. And the thing that destroyed it was invisible. The story turns, as so many stories in this period do, on catastrophe. In the middle of the 14th century, a horror swept across Europe that killed somewhere between a third and half of the entire population. The Black Death. Whole villages emptied, cities became open graves. And in the terrified aftermath, people did what human beings always do when faced with something they cannot understand. They searched desperately for an explanation. Bad air, essentially, that seeped into the body. Now follow their logic because it's terrifyingly reasonable given what they knew. If poison enters the body through openings, the enemy was anything that opened the body up. And what they asked opens the body more than hot water. Here was their reasoning. Hot water opens the pores of the skin. Steam relaxes and widens them. And once those pores are wide open, the poisoned air of a plague-ridden world could rush straight in, deep into the flesh, into the blood, into the vital organs. Bathing, in other words, didn't clean you. It unlocked the door and invited death inside. I want you to sit with how logical that felt at the time. These weren't fools. Working from the assumption that disease lived in the air, avoiding hot water was a perfectly rational act of self-defense. And so, out of fear, Europe began to turn its back on water. The bathhouses started to close. The steam went cold. One of the most beloved institutions of daily life became, in the public imagination, a death trap. And if that already surprises you, I promise the story only becomes stranger from here. Because once you take water away from people, they don't simply give up on being clean. They invent an entirely new definition of what clean even means. But before we go there, let me say something. If you find yourself as fascinated as I am by these forgotten corners of human life, the ordinary things we never think to question, then consider staying with me on these journeys. There's an entire hidden history of every. And the answer reveals just how completely they rethought the human body.
They came to believe that water was the danger, but linen, clean white linen, was the solution. The theory went like this. A fresh linen shirt worn against the skin would absorb the body's sweat and impurities, drawing the dirt out of you like a magnet. Changing your shirt was washing. Let me repeat that because it's one of the strangest ideas I've ever encountered. To them, putting on a clean shirt was not covering up a dirty body, it was actively cleaning it. This is why, in this era, wealth and cleanliness were measured not by how often you touched water, but by how much white linen you owned and how often you could change it. A nobleman might change his shirt 2-3 times a day and consider himself impeccably clean, while never once going near a bath. The whiteness of your collar and cuffs, deliberately displayed, was a public announcement. Look how clean I am. The visible linen was the proof. And into the gap where bathing used to be rushed something else. If you cannot wash the smell away, you must cover it. And so came the great age of perfume. The powerful drenched themselves in scent, in rosewater and musk and civet and orange blossom, not as a luxury, but as a necessity. They carried pomanders, little balls of aromatic material, and pressed them to their noses to ward off the bad air. Perfume wasn't about smelling pleasant for its own sake. It was armor against a world they believed was trying to poison them through their own skin. Now, here is where I have to correct a myth, because this period gets exaggerated in the retelling. You'll often hear that nobody ever touched water at all. That's not quite true. People did engage in what we might call dry washing.
They wiped their faces, their hands, parts of the body they could reach, with cloths, sometimes dampened, sometimes with a little scented water. Hands and face, the parts on display, received attention. It was the full immersion, the sinking of the whole body into hot water that inspired real dread. And this brings us to the revelation that for me is the most astonishing part of the entire story. Because we're not talking about peasants in the countryside who simply couldn't afford baths. We're talking about the most magnificent court in Europe. Consider the Palace of Versailles. The very word conjures gold, mirrors, silk, the absolute pinnacle of human luxury and refinement in the 17th century. Thousands of nobles lived and moved through those glittering halls. And that dazzling palace, this monument to human sophistication, was built with almost no thought given to bathing as we understand it. The splendor was total, the bathing was not. Beneath the perfume and the silk and the diamonds, the reality of the human body was managed by other means entirely, by linen and scent and avoidance. Even royalty embraced this. There are accounts of monarchs across Europe who took pride in rarely bathing. One Spanish queen is said to have boasted that she had bathed only twice in her life, once at birth and once before her wedding. Whether every such story is literally true or polished by legend, the fact that bathing so little was something to boast about tells you everything about how thoroughly the world had been turned upside down. To wash rarely wasn't shameful. It was a mark of refinement, of belonging to a class that understood the supposed dangers of water. So, how did we ever climb back out of this? How did water stop being the enemy?
The change came slowly, and it came through science. As the centuries passed, physicians began cautiously to reconsider. In the 18th century, a growing movement started to argue that fresh water and fresh air might actually be good for the body rather than deadly to it. Doctors began prescribing cold water bathing as a cure, a bracing tonic for health. Slowly, water was being rehabilitated. But the real turning point, the thing that shattered the old fear completely, came in the 19th century, because that's when scientists finally understood what had truly been killing people all along. Not bad air, not open pores, germs, invisible living organisms spread through contaminated water, through filth, through unwashed hands. And here is the beautiful, tragic irony at the heart of this whole story. For centuries, people had avoided water to protect themselves from disease. And it turned out that avoiding water, letting filth accumulate, was precisely what allowed disease to flourish. The very thing they feared was the thing that could have saved them. When that understanding took hold, everything changed with astonishing speed. Cities built sewers and water systems. The idea took root that cleanliness and health were partners, not enemies. The bath returned, transformed now from a suspected killer into the foundation of a healthy life. And within a few generations, the daily wash went from a dangerous act to something so ordinary we do it without a single thought. And that, to me, is the part worth pausing on. Because when you step into a hot shower tomorrow morning, warm water running freely over your...
What we call basic hygiene, they would have called a death wish. The comfort you don't even think about was for centuries a fear people organized their entire lives around. The more I sit with this story, the more it reminds me how fragile and how strange our certainties really are. These people weren't stupid. They reasoned carefully from what they believed to be true, and they arrived with total confidence at a conclusion that was completely wrong. It makes me wonder, quietly, which of our own certainties, the things we do every single day without questioning, might look just as strange to the people who come after us. History is full of these hidden reversals, these moments where everything ordinary people believed turns out to be the opposite of the truth. And there are so many more of them waiting, quiet, forgotten stories about the everyday lives we think we understand, but really don't. So if you're ready, let's keep pulling at these threads together and uncover another chapter of the past that will make you see the world you live in a little differently.